Shall we start, guys?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yesterday we have seen constructor injection, how we can able to inject the dependency by using constructor. Now we will see setter injection. Before that, what is the purpose of no argument constructor? Why you have
So,
created the no argument constructor? I thought they are implied by Java and only required when you have an overloaded constructor. See here, if I have any constructor in my class, then compiler won't be creating no argument constructor. If at least one constructor I have declared explicitly, then compiler won't be creating one more constructor. When you don't have the constructor in your class, compiler will be creating one default constructor. If you are declaring any constructor, at least one constructor, then compiler won't be creating any default constructor. So that is why in the baseball coach, in the baseball coach,
sir, screen is not shared, sir.
not here,
Yes.
here no argument constructor. We have comment everything here. We have commented it out. Okay. If I uncomment this, then problem comes. Observe. There is no constructor supporting this object. That means when I'm creating the object, there is no corresponding constructor to invoke. So that is why in the baseball, what I'll do is create the constructor. No argument constructor I'm going to create. That is baseball coach, baseball coach. This is the no argument constructor. Simply like this. Now we don't have any error. Observe, I'm saving it. Now we don't have any error. To getting rid of that error, we are creating this no argument constructor. If you create any constructor, then compiler won't be creating any default constructor. If you commented it now, if you are commenting it, then no issues. You don't need this constructor at all. You can able to remove this constructor. Now we'll come to setter injection. Just give me a moment. Okay. Now we'll come to setter injection. What do we need this setter injection? Setter injection overview.
In this video, we're going to cover setter injection. So we've already covered constructor injection in the previous videos. In this video, we'll focus on making use of setter injection. So with setter injection, this is where the Spring framework will inject your dependencies by calling setter methods on your class. So looking at the development process, and again, I love to do things step by step. The first thing we'll have to do, or the first step we'll have, is creating the setter methods in our class for injections. Then the second step is configuring the dependency in the Spring configuration file. Okay, so let's take a look at step one, creating the setter method. So we'll have this new class called Cricket Coach. We're going to explore a new sport here. So Cricket Coach, they'll have a private field, they'll have a no argument constructor, and then we'll have a setter method for a set fortune service. This is the method that will be called by Spring when they inject the dependency using setter injection. So in step two, we have to configure the dependency injection in our Spring config file. So up top, we have our fortune service, like from the previous videos. And now here in the bottom, we'll have this My Cricket Coach. We inject the dependency using setter injection. So here we say property, we give the name of the property, fortune service, and then the ref, My Fortune Service. And the ref refers to the bean that was defined a little earlier in this example. Now, when you have property name equals fortune service, what Spring will actually do is it'll take that property name and call the setter method on your class for that given property. So they'll look for a public method called set fortune service. So Spring will actually call the set fortune service, and they'll pass in that value for that call. So in general, any property name you have, Spring will attempt to make a call to the setter method for that given property. So if I had a property named Best Athlete, Spring will look for a method called public void set Best Athlete. So it takes that property name, the first letter of that property, and makes it a capital, and then it makes a method called on the fly. So this is how Spring will process your config file. So up top, we have the bean ID of My Fortune Service. And like we've seen before, Spring simply creates an instance of your fortune service by using the new keyword for the no argument constructor. Then for our Cricket Coach, Spring will create a new Cricket Coach using its no argument constructor, and then it'll inject that dependency by calling the setter method. So whatever the property name is, in this case the property name is fortune service, Spring will call set fortune service, and they'll pass in a reference to that given bean. And that's what happens behind the scenes when Spring processes your configuration file. All right, so let's go ahead and move into Eclipse and let's write some code. So with our development process, the first thing we need to do is create a setter method in our class for injections. But actually what we need to do really is create a new class first. So let's go ahead and create our Cricket Coach class. And the name of this class, we'll call it Cricket Coach, right? Pretty simple. And for the interfaces here, I actually need to make use of the coach interface. I need to add the coach interface. So I'll click on add. I'll type in coach at the top. And this will give me my coach interface. Okay. All right, so now we have this coach interface listed. And we'll keep all the other defaults, and then we'll hit finish. Okay, great. So we have our very basic Cricket Coach class. And what I want to do is go ahead and just do some of the basic work here for these methods that we need: get daily workout and get daily fortune. So let me just kind of clean this up a bit. Let me add the daily workout here for Cricket. And so here we're going to practice fast bowling for 15 minutes a day. And Cricket's a great sport. And also when you get the daily fortune, and remember this one, we need a helper, so we need to make use of a dependency here. So private fortune service, and I'm going to say fortune service. Hasn't been assigned yet, but we'll take care of that in a second. But let's just go ahead and use it down here in this get daily fortune method. So here we'll say return fortune service dot get fortune. And there we go. All right, so this kind of covers just
First, we should create the class. In that class, we are going to develop the methods, setter methods. But as of now, one class we are creating, cricket coach, that is going to implement the coach. If that is going to implement the coach, these two methods should be having the body. Right click on the package, new class, cricket coach, cricket coach, click on finish. This cricket coach is going to implement the coach. Implements coach. That is the case. Click on this add unimplemented methods. Get daily workouts. Get daily fortune. For get daily workout, while returning, practice bowling for 20 minutes. Now, for fortune, we have the dependency of fortune service. Private fortune service. Private fortune service. Fortune service. While returning, fortune service dot get fortune this much. Okay.
the basic infrastructure work that we needed for a new coach that we're bringing online, returning the daily workout and also returning the daily fortune. All right, so that takes care of that part of it. Now, the next thing I need to do here is actually create a no argument constructor, because Spring's going to actually call this constructor when they make a reference to our beam. So again, constructor simply has the same name as the class. I'm going to create the coach. And what I'll do inside of this method here, or this constructor, is I'll actually make use of a sysout print line. I just want to put a little diagnostic message in here, just so I know that, hey, we're actually inside of our constructor. Because when I run the program, I like to see kind of what's going on behind the scenes by Spring. So Spring's going to call this method or call this constructor, and I just want to get some diagnostics, just so I know that, hey, things are happening for us. Okay, now we can get to our real step one. We have to do some preliminary work, but we're ready to go now. So here, this is where we actually create the setter method in our class for the injections. And I'll make use of this Eclipse trick. I'll just do a right click, I'll choose source, and I'll go down to generate getters and setters. And in this scenario, I really only need a setter. So I'll simply expand this list here, and I'll just check the box for set fortune service. That's the only method that I need. I don't really need the getter method, only the setter method. You can add the getter if you'd like, but it's not required. All right, so go ahead and hit OK. And that should create a new method for me. And it's down there. Let me just click some white space, more white space. And here it is. So on lines 12 through 14, that's that new setter method that was just created for us by Eclipse. And this is the actual setter method that will be called by Spring when they actually inject the dependency. All right, so this looks pretty good so far. I'll just copy paste this print line. I'll do a similar thing here in the setter method. So just a diagnostic method to say, hey, I'm inside of this setter method, and I give the actual method name. Again, mainly just for us when we test the program out, just to see what's going on. All right, so we kind of step back a bit, and this is basically all the real stuff here. We created that no argument constructor, and we also created our setter method. So we're in pretty good shape so far. So I'll see you in the next video.
The remaining thing is simply we are going to create a no argument constructor. We need one message, okay? That is why is implementing no argument constructor. If I leave it default, what happens? I won't get any message, okay? I won't get any message. So here what I'll do, cricket coach, cricket coach, cricket coach, SYSO, cricket coach. Plus simply I can able to give it like this inside the no argument constructor. Now this is what creating the no argument constructor. No argument constructor. Then creating a method for setter injection. Here you can do right click, source, generate getters and setters. I need only setter. So expand this, select this checkbox, get fortune service. Not get, actually we need set, okay, only set. So generate, fine. After that, what we need to do is sys out. I'll copy this message. Setter method. Here what is happening? This method, set method, is going to take fortune service as the argument. That fortune service data is going to be initialized with this variable fortune service, this dot fortune service. We'll see that this is the setter method, then this is the no argument constructor. To get the message, simply I'm giving the no argument constructor, okay, to see the message. The main thing here it is setter method for injection, okay, creating the setter method for injection here. This one is important.
All right, so we're moving right along here. So the next step in our dev process is to configure the dependency in our Spring configuration file. So let's go ahead and open up our application context.xml, and we'll set up our dependency injection. So I'll kind of expand the window here for this file. And I'll move down to the bottom, and we'll add a new bean entry here for our cricket coach. So bean ID, my cricket coach. And for the class equals, I'm just going to leave it empty for right now. And then I'll come back and use that same technique that I used before, because I need the fully qualified class name of my cricket coach. So again, what I'll do is I'll just kind of move back to the class cricket coach, and I will select it and right click and choose copy qualified name. So that'll give me the fully qualified name, which is the package name dot the class name. And then I'll move back over to my configuration file, and I'll just do a right click and choose paste. So there we go. So that's our fully qualified class name for this example. All right, so we're doing pretty good here. Now let's go through and actually set up our setter injection. set up injection. And what I'll do here is I'll set a property. I'll say name equals, and then I'll set ref equals. And I'll go ahead and fill in some of the values here. So the name, this is the actual property name here. So the property name is Fortune Service, and the ref is going to be the name of My Fortune Service. And again, the ref of My Fortune Service, that's the bean that was defined a little bit earlier in this configuration file. I'm going to scroll up a bit so you can see it. So up on line 13, that bean ID of My Fortune Service, that's the actual same reference that we'll use when we inject it into our cricket coach. Okay, great. And then also as a reminder here with that property, name equals Fortune Service, the Spring framework will actually call set Fortune Service. So again, they'll take that property name, the first character, they'll make it a cap, and then they'll call set Fortune Service. All right, so we're pretty good here. Another thing I want to do is create a new app class for this demo. So just to kind of start from scratch, just so we have a separate area to work in and makes it a little bit simpler for us to work through. So I'll create a new class, and I'll call it setter demo app. And again, just a class that's going to have a main method to read the Spring config and perform some operations. So I'll check the box there for the main method, and then I'll keep all the other defaults, and I'll hit finish. All right, so here's our setter demo app. I'll go ahead and clear out this auto-generated stuff, and I'll just quickly just write some comments here as far as what we need to do in this app. So again, we're kind of starting from scratch here. So the first thing we'll do is load the Spring configuration file. We will retrieve the bean from the Spring container. Then we'll call methods on the bean, of course. And then finally, we'll be nice and we'll close the context. So that's the basic game plan here for this demo app. And we've seen this before in some previous videos, but we're just going to kind of do it again from scratch just for this setter example. Alrighty here, so loading the Spring configuration file. So class path XML, application context, context equals, new, and I use that big long class name. I'm just going to do a copy paste on that. And then I just pass in the actual name of the file that I'm reading in, application context.xml. So there's my context. And you can fix the imports here by hovering over the red arrow and say, or the red line and say import, and they'll take care of the imports for you. All right, we're good there. Now let's retrieve the bean. Okay, again, a little white space at the bottom. Retrieve the bean by saying cricket coach, the coach, equals context.getBean, and I give the name of the bean, my cricket coach, comma, and then cricketcoach.class. All right, so now when we retrieve this bean, they'll actually do all the setter injection work behind the scenes for us. And then actually, this is kind of cool. Let's do this real quick. So let's do this context.close, and that line here for calling methods on the bean, let's just say that we'll come back and do this later. Because what I want to do is just check the basic operations here, what Spring is doing behind the scenes, because we put some print line methods in there as far as the constructor and the setter. And Spring should call those methods automatically. And so we should see something when we actually run this program. Let's go ahead and save this, and let's do a right click and choose Run As a Java Application. And we beam up the console, and oh yeah, it looks really good. Look at that. So we're loading that config file, so it reads the configs, and then here it says we're inside the NoR constructor, and we're inside the setter method. And those are those little print line methods that we personally added. So we know that Spring is actually calling these methods for us behind the scenes when they're processing that config file. So this all kind of works out with everything that we've been learning here in the video. So this looks really good. I'm confident now going forward with how this part works out. All right, so now we can move back into our setter demo app, and then we can go ahead and actually write some code for doing this stuff. So let's go ahead and call the methods now. So I'm just going to do a print line on the workout and the fortune. So this is our print line. Here I'll say the coach dot get daily fortune. I'm sorry, actually get daily workout, and then a similar thing here for the coach dot get daily fortune. There we go. That's my fortune. All right. All right, good stuff. So these are the methods here that we're calling on our coach. And we should see, again, some information being displayed to the screen when we run it. All right, so again, we save it, right click, run as, Java application. And we look at the console window here, and oh yeah, looking good. So those are our diagnostic messages up top. And then that's our daily workout, practice fast bowling. And then the item here is our fortune. Today is your lucky day. So this is great. So everything kind of works out as desired. Spring is making use of setter injection. They're injecting that fortune service. And then we can use our coach and call methods just like we could do before with all the other coaches like baseball coach and track coach. So again, really good example here. We're just making use of another technique in Spring as far as doing setter injection. So again, great job. Pat yourself on the back, and
Fine. So now we need to go to configuration.xml. Configuration.xml. I'll create another bean. Okay. Let's go for this one. Bean ID. We should go for different ID here. Then, if you want to copy fully qualified name, then you can able to go for cricket coach. Select this, right click, copy qualified name. Then you can able to paste it here. Here is that. Here. You need to give a different name for this. What is this? Okay. We need this fortune as well, right? For this. Okay. Now fortune service is there. Then what is this? Bean ID coach. Now this one I'll give it as bean. Simply I'll say cricket bean. Cricket bean. Fine. Now what I'll do is property. Property. Here property name is what? Is fortune service. Okay, I need to inject. Okay, I need to inject. So here I'll go for fortune service. Fortune service. This is the property name. Then reference. Reference is what? reference is this one, my fortune. This one. Need to close it by forward slash. So this much. Fine. Next, what we need to do is we're going to create a separate runner class. Okay, separate driver class for this cricket coach. That means a new driver I'm creating. Simply for this application, I'm going to create a new driver class. Right click, new class, string demo, new driver, something like that. I'll give. I need public static void main. Click on finish. Then here what I'll do. First, I need to load the configuration file. Okay, load the configuration file. How? By using this XML. Sorry, first class path XML application context. Maybe first XML class path application context. XML class path XML class path XML application context. Something that is there. Okay, I'll just see the suggestion is not there. Here itself we have developed earlier in the MySpring app. What is that? Class path XML application context. Class path XML application context. Same is there, no issues. Then class path XML application context. Okay, main method is there. Then what is the error? Class path XML application context. Create the constant. String demo new driver. Okay. Create a constant. It is not identifying. Why it is not identifying this class? Class path XML application context. Text. Let me see. Class path context equal to now I need to load the configuration file. That is configuration.xml. I should say here new. Fine. Load the configuration file, configure the, then I need to configure the beam. Sorry, what I need to do? After configuration, after loading the configuration file, after loading the configuration of file, we need to retrieve the bean from the string container. How? Retrieve the bean from string container. Hit coach, coach equal to context dot get bean. Get bean. Here, name is, what is the name? Name is, in the configuration file, whatever we have given, create a bean. Okay, this one, I'm copying this one. Fine. That is the first argument. Now second argument. Let's come to coach, cricket coach. It is implementing the coach. Okay, fine. If that is the case, let's go for coach.class. What I'm getting. So I need to add the cast, cricket bean, the coach, the coach to coach. Type one. Change the type of the coach to coach. No. Here. Okay, fine. I'll get rid of this. Now, are we getting the same? Yes. Cricket coach. Context data get a bean. Which one I need to supply here? Get coach is there. Setter injection, right? Okay. Actually, it's taking cricket coach data class. Cricket coach data class. Fine. Then what we need to do is the coach dot daily workouts the coach daily function. Then fine. Let us check. Right click run as Java application. Spring is going to create an object of cricket coach. We are not creating the object. Internally, Spring container only creating the object. So it is going to call what? No argument constructor. Then what we have done. Now, see, because of the setter injection, okay, what we are getting the output inside the setter method. How we are getting that? How we are getting that? In the configuration file, what we have done is property. Okay, this is for setter injection. Property name is, where is that cricket? Here. Um, this is for fortune actually. Okay, this is fine. But in the cricket coach, we have this set fortune service. Okay, that means we have created one setter method. For this, we're injecting. How we're injecting the fortune service? Through the configuration file property. In case of constructor injection, this one. In case of setter injection, you should use this one, property.
Sir,
Constructor injection.
I have a question. Property
Tell
tag
me.
is going to be used for initializing the values.
No, it is not initializing the values. It is for injecting fortune service to the setter method of cricket coach.
Okay.
Injecting fortune service, injecting fortune service object to the cricket coach by using setter method.
Okay.
Now we are getting practice bowling for 20 minutes, as well as this is the dependency. Okay, setter injection. By using setter method, we have injected fortune service to the cricket coach. Today is your lucky day. This is about setter injection. Now, what about injecting literal values? How we can able to inject literal values?
Hey, in this video, we're going to learn how to inject literal values into our Spring objects. So currently we have our cricket coach. We've learned how to inject a fortune service to our cricket coach, but now I'd like to inject some literal values, like some string values. So I'd like to inject the actual email address for the coach and the actual team name for the coach, like the Sunrisers. All right, so let's go ahead and check out our development process for this. So again, I love to do things step by step. So the first thing we're going to do here is create setter methods in our class for injections. And then we'll also configure the injection in our Spring configuration file. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at step one, create setter methods in your class. So here's our class cricket coach. Actually, the first thing we want to do is create some private fields to hold these values. So I'll have a private string for email address, and then a private string for team. Once I have that set up, then I need to set up public setter methods for these fields here. So I have a public void set email address, public void set team. And we'll cover the coding piece in the video. All right, so now that's taken care of. Now we do step two, configure the injection in the Spring config file. So again, here's my cricket coach. Then I have these two new entries here for property name equals email address, and then value. Now I give the actual value of the email address, the best coach at lovetocode.com. And note here the attribute name is value equals as opposed to ref. So value is used for literal values, ref is used to refer to other objects or dependencies. And then I just repeat the process here for this next property, team. So I give the actual value and I give the actual literal value here for the team. All right, so that's the basic process there for injecting literal values into your Spring application. In the next video, we'll dive into Eclipse. All right, so let's dive into Eclipse and let's go ahead and write some code. So again, looking at our development process, the first step we need to do is create the setter methods in the class for injections. All right, so let's go ahead and open up the file here for our Cricut coach. Expand the window here. So again, remember the first thing we really need to do is set up these private fields here for email address and team. So I'll just write a quick comment here for myself. And then I'll go ahead and enter these private fields here. So I have this private string email address, and then I have a private string team. So these are just the fields that we're going to use to actually assign the data once it's injected to our application. But that's basically what we have here. So this looks pretty good so far. Now, the next thing I need to do is actually generate or create the setter methods here in our class for injections. And so I'll actually make use of Eclipse to generate this for me. So here I do a right click, I choose source, and I choose generate getters and setters. So here in this dialog, you tell Eclipse what you want. So we'll check the box here for email address and for team, and then we can expand it, and we can see that Eclipse will create the getter and setter methods for each one of these fields. Now, you don't really need the getter methods, you only need the setters, but I'll go ahead and use both of them because we'll actually want to print out the values in our little test program. All right, so here we go. So we have this all set up. So we have our methods here for get email address and set email address, and get team and set team. And these are, of course, generated by Eclipse. So thank you, Eclipse. All righty. Now, what I'd like to do is add some little diagnostic methods here, or diagnostic messages here in our setters. So I'm just going to copy line 36 that we had from our set fortune service method. So I'll just copy that line, right click, choose copy, or you can use the keyboard if you'd like. And then I'll just move up to this setter for email address, and I'll just paste it in there. All right, and I need to simply just update the description. So I just copy email address and then put it there. So I just want to make sure that this message is correct. So it says Cricut Coach inside setter method for set email address. Okay, good. So this is good. Now let's just go ahead and copy paste this line and do a similar thing here for when we set the team. Because again, I'm adding these little messages here just so I can see how Spring is working behind the scenes when they call these appropriate methods. So I just added a setter method here, or message for a set team. Mainly just diagnostics for us, mainly a training purpose here. All right, so I'll just kind of highlight it. So these are the methods that we have here. Primarily, Spring's going to call the setter methods when they inject those values into your class. And we have the getter methods just so we can display them later in one of our test programs. All right, so this looks good. Now let's go ahead and move over to step 2. So in step 2, basically, we need to configure the injection in our Spring configuration file. So again, I'm moving down here to this My Cricut Coach that we already have from the previous videos where we injected the fortune service. Now I'm going to inject those other 2 values here for the property email address and also the property team. All right, so here I give a property name equals, and I give the actual property, so it's email address. Make sure you spell it correct and use the correct case. And then value equals, and note here we give value, so that's the actual value that we're placing here, not ref, but it's a value, it's a literal value. And we'll say the best coach at lovetocode.com. So that takes care of email address. And now let's repeat the process here for the property of team. So name equals team. So the value equals sunrisers. And that looks pretty good. So now remember here, when we make use of these properties, they're going to call the appropriate setter method. So since we have a property name email address, Spring is going to call set email address. And also property name equals team, Spring will call set team. And it will pass in those values or inject those values. All right, so this looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and update our demo application. So I'm going to open up setter demo app.java. And I'll just kind of move down to the bottom. This is what we had from before in some of the previous videos. And what I want to do now is call some of those new methods that we have just to see those new values that we injected into the item. So here. So we'll simply do a system.print line and we'll print out the coach's email address. So we say get email address. And then we do a similar thing here for a team. So we can print out the actual team name. So system.print line, the coach, get team. There we go. Cool. All right, so this is it. So that's basically our demo app. It's making a call to those methods, and all of these values were injected already by Spring behind the scenes. And so everything should just work out as desired. So let's go ahead and save this. And let's just do a right click and choose Run As, Java Application. It's going to beam it up in the console. And oh, wow, a lot of good stuff here. So let's kind of check this out. So it's reading information from the config file. It's calling that no-art constructor. And then it goes through and it's making calls to those setter methods. So these are the little diagnostic messages that we added to our code. So we're confirming that, hey, Spring is actually calling those methods there. This is some of our previous stuff of fast bowling and so on. But now the new part here is the actual coach's email address and their actual team name, the Sunrisers. So this looks really good. So this kind of works out as desired.
So what we need to do in the cricket coach, private string, email address, private string, team. So right click, source, generate getters and setters. So expand this. For email, I want get and set. For team, I want get and set. Click on generate. Fine. In the setter, what I'll do, cricket coach, set the email. Set email address. Spelling mistake is there, no issues. Otherwise, I'll make it address only. Here I'm copying this and inside the setter of team, cricket coach, setter team. Just for diagnostic message that we are getting this. Okay, this much. Okay, then come to the configuration.xml. This is for setter injection. Setter injection. This is for injecting literal values. Injecting. Literal values in settlement. Setter injection. Setter method. Injecting literal values. Here, property. Property. Property name. Property name is email address. Then value is um, best coach at IPL.com. I'm closing this. Same thing. Team. Team. The best team is Royal Challengers Bangalore. Likewise. Now, come to the Spring demo. We are going to call what is out the coach dot get email address. Then sys out the coach dot get a team. Save it. Right click, run as Java application. So what are we getting? Today is your lucky day. Here, first it is going to call what? No argument constructor. Then inside the setter method, okay, that is for setter injection in case of method. Now injecting the literal values. Okay. Setter method of set email address, setter method of set a team. Practice bowling for 20 minutes. Today is your lucky day. Then this is the value we have supplied. Injected the literal value. Best coach at IPL.com. Then best team is Royal Challengers. So this is what? Injecting literal values. Then what next? Why do we use cricket coach instead of coach? For the cricket coach, answer. The get a team method is only defined in cricket coach. Yes, of course, that is why. It is not part of the coach interface. Simple. Then, injecting values from a property file. Okay. Injecting values from a properties file.
In this video, we're going to learn how to inject values from a properties file. All right, so in the previous videos, we learned how to inject literal values. So we could inject the email address and the team. The only problem is that those values were hard-coded in the config file. And what we'd like to do is be able to read this information from a properties file. So we'll have an external properties file, we'll have our values there, and then we'll be able to read the email address and team name from this properties file. All right, again, you know how I love my step-by-step process. So the first thing we're gonna have to do here is create the properties file. Then we'll load the properties file into the Spring config file. And then finally in step 3, we'll reference those values from the properties file. All right, so let's go ahead and look at step 1, creating the properties file, right? Very simple. Simply open a text editor, create a file, in this case, sport.properties, and you simply give the name value pairs. So the name of the property is foo.email, and the value is my easy coach. The actual property names, you can give any name that you want. There's no direct relation to your actual bean. You can call them foo bar, test, funny, bozo, anything. The only thing is that you have to simply be consistent between referring to the property name in this config file and also referring to the property name in your Spring setup. All right, so those are our properties. Now step 2 is loading the properties file in the Spring config. So in your application context.xml, you simply make use of this context property placeholder. You give the location for it. So in this case, the file will be on our class path, and then you give the actual file name. So in this example, our properties file is called sport.properties. And so we'll actually load that properties file into memory, and then you can use it within this Spring config file. So now this brings us to step 3, referencing the values from the properties file. So the general syntax is you simply use the $ curly brace and you give whatever the property name is. And then Spring will actually substitute that property value directly there. So in this case, for email address, I simply give value equals $ curly brace foo.email. So foo.email is the actual property name in that props file, and then I'll include the value of my easy coach at Love to Code. And then here I do a similar thing here for the team. So I reference that property name foo.team, and again, based on information from the properties file, it'll actually put in the value of Royal Challengers Bangalore. So that's basically it. You can add additional props in there as you like and simply reference them. So the key item here is that you reference those values using the $ curly brace and then whatever that property name is. All right, so good stuff here. In the next video, we're going to dive into Eclipse and we'll actually write this code. All right, so I'll see you then. All right, so just moving into Eclipse here and looking at the development process, the first thing we're going to do is create the properties file. So what I'll do here is I'll click on my source directory, I'll do a right click, and I'll say new file. And for the actual name of the file, I'll call it sport.properties. And once you're happy with that, go ahead and click on the Finish button. Now we simply just add the values here for our properties file. So our first property name is called foo.email, and then I simply just enter a value here for the email address. And then I do a similar thing here for the actual team name. So foo.team equals, and I simply give the team name. So again, you can give any property name that you want. You simply have to be consistent with the actual value in this props file and what you use in the Spring config file. All right, so this looks pretty good here for the basic properties file for right now. All right, so let's go ahead and move over to step 2. So step 2 is loading the properties file in our Spring config file. So I'm going to actually open up my application context.xml file, expand the window here. And what I want to do right near the top here, like around, let's see here. Yeah, so like on line 10, what I want to do is actually add a reference here for that context property placeholder. This is what we use to actually load the props file into the Spring environment. So I make use of context : property placeholder, and then I give the actual location. So this file is going to be on our class path. So I say class path : and then I give the name of my actual properties file. So sport.properties, and that's the file that we just created. And oh my, I normally put my comments first, but I'll put the comment last. So here I'll just make a little comment to myself, load the properties file, sport.properties, just a way to kind of jog my memory when I go back and look at this file at a later time. So good job. All right, so then the next step here, step 3, is reference the values from the properties file. So again, this is our Cricut coach here that we've been working on so far. And on lines 34 and 35, we have those values hard-coded. And what I'd like to do instead is make use of that information from the properties file. So again, I make use of that syntax, right? The $ curly brace and the actual property name. So here, that foo.email, that's the property name. Then I'll just kind of move back over here and I'll just use that $ curly brace, and then I give the actual property name, foo.email. You have to make sure that it's the same name you have from the config file. All right, so that covers it for the email. Let's do a similar thing here for foo.team. And I'll just move back over to my configuration file. And here I'll say $ curly brace, foo.team. All right. Excellent. It's very good so far. So that's it. So instead of the hard-coded values, now we're going to read those values from the actual properties file. So this was great. I like this. The app is kind of very flexible at this point and also very configurable. So in fact, we actually have a config file for the config file, right? We have this sport.properties that's using to configure this Spring config. Anyways, we're all good. So now what we can do now is actually run our demo app, setter demo app.java. So once we open up this file here, there's really no changes we have to do. We're simply changing how Spring's reading information from the configs. So all this stuff we can keep the same, no changes, and we can just simply run it. So just do a right click, run as Java application. And then we can take a look at the results here. And yeah, looking really good here. Looking really good. So at the bottom, we have our coach's email address and also the team. So it's actually reading that information from that file, sport.properties, and then plugging those values in there. So this is great. I love it. I love it. Things work as planned. How about that? Now let's test it out though. Let's go back and change our properties file just to verify that it really is working. And I'm going to change the email address here to Silly, and I'm going to change the team name to a really awesome team here. I'm going to put in this special super team, and it's called the Mighty Java Coders. Yeah, and it's composed of all of us, right? Because we're all superheroes and we're all super athletes, and we can beat any other Cricut team out there, right? All right, so let's try this. So we saved it. Again, since it's a properties file, no need to change the application. Simply run the application again, and it should pick up those new properties. And let's take a look at it. Yeah, all right, good stuff. So there's our team name, Mighty Java Coders, and our email address, Silly@Love2Code. So this is great. Woohoo! We are rocking.
So reading the values from the properties file. I'm going to create a property file. Right click on this SRC. You should create the properties file in the SRC, okay, not in the package. New file, sport dot properties. New, and name it as the file as sport dot properties. Hit the finish. Now email is But to don't give any unnecessary spaces. That IPL.com. Okay. Put at IPL.com. And should not give this. Then team. Team is equal to something like Mumbai Indians. Then come to the configuration.xml. Keeping a comment here that reading values from a properties file. Here, what we'll do is first what we need to do is context. Context. What is that? Context placeholder. Okay. Context property placeholder. Then what is that? The location. Location is port dot properties. Port dot properties. Then here what I'm trying to do, let us comment on this one. Okay, comment on this one. Before that, I'll copy this. Okay, copy. Then I'm commenting this one, pasting it here. Dollar email. Then dollar in. Okay, like this. Now come to the Spring demo new driver. Let's run it. Okay. Right click, run as Java application. So we are getting coachvijay@ipl.com Mumbai Indians. This is how we can able to read the values from the properties file. Injecting values from the properties file. Then, so practice activity #2 is there. Can able to copy and paste it here to practice this. Next section, Spring Bean scopes and life cycle. Okay, let's take 10 minutes of break. We'll come back and later we'll continue. Okay, 10 minutes of break. Stay in the call. Don't disconnect. Just to take 10 minutes, something like that. If you want, you can able to have your dinner and come back. Dinner is not possible, it seems. Let's finish it off. Okay, just take 5 minutes of break. 5 minutes.
Okay, sir.
Guys, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Next, spring bean scopes.
In this video, we're going to discuss the bean scopes available in Spring. So what exactly are scopes? Well, a scope refers to the life cycle of a bean. For example, it tells you how long the bean will live, how many instances will be created, and also how is the bean shared in the Spring environment. So the default scope for a bean is Singleton. So here's an example here of just some bean code that we had earlier, and we didn't explicitly give a scope. So by default, the scope is Singleton. But now you're probably wondering, well, what exactly is a singleton? You know it's the default scope, but what is it? Well, for a singleton, the Spring container creates only one instance of the bean. It's cached in memory, and then all requests for that bean will return a shared reference to the same bean. So the end result is that there's only one bean, and everyone will share it. Here's a nice diagram to kind of show you this example. In this example, we have the coach equals context.getBean my coach, and it'll give you a reference to like a track coach that you have to find. And then later on in the code, if you would also do a similar thing saying context.getBean my coach, the same bean ID, then it'll basically give you a reference to the same bean. We have these two object references here, and they point to the same area of memory, or they point to the same bean. So again, Spring makes use of a singleton. It'll create only one bean and then share it for everyone who requests that bean. So the singleton scope is default, and the best use case for this is for a stateless bean, where you don't need to maintain any state. You can explicitly specify the bean scope. I mean, by now you know that by default you have the singleton scope, but if you want to explicitly specify, then you make use of the scope attribute. So you say scope equals singleton, and that'll make it a singleton bean. And that's kind of the preferred approach to minimize the number of beans that are created. But now there are additional Spring bean scopes that you can make use of. We've already covered singleton. There's also the prototype scope, which creates a new bean instance for each container request, and we'll see examples of that coming up. And we'll also use that as a demo in the video coming up. Then the next three items here, request, session, and global session, these scopes are only used in a web environment. So request is for a given web request, session is for a HTTP web session, for like session tracking, for like maybe a shopping cart or something, and then global session is scope application wide. But we'll talk more about these later when we get into the Spring MVC section. But for now, we'll simply focus on singleton and prototype. So here's an example of using prototype scope. So again, remember, prototype scope, a new object is created for each request. So in this example here, I have my bean ID of my coach, and I have scope equals prototype. That means that every time I make a request for this my coach, they'll create a new instance each time. So a nice little diagram here. So the line of code at the top, the coach equals context get bean my coach. It'll create a new instance of that bean. I get a reference to it. And then a similar thing here, when I say alpha coach equals context I get bean my coach, it'll create a new object for you, and you'll have your own reference. So the prototype scope is good for keeping track of stateful data. So again, whenever you see prototype, just think of the new keyword. It's going to create a new bean for each request for that component or that object. All right, so this is some really good stuff. Let's go ahead and move forward in the next. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into Eclipse. We're going to run some demos here on bean scopes. We'll take a look at the singleton scope and the prototype scope, and we'll see all of this code running in action, and I don't know, just get a good feel for it. So the first thing we want to do is copy our application context file. We're actually going to create a new version of it. So we'll take this existing application context, we'll just do a right click and choose copy. And then we'll simply paste it. So we just do a right click and we choose paste. In this new version, we'll give it a new name here. So I'll call it Beam Scope application context.xml. And so with these Spring config files, you can really give them any name that you want. And your project can actually have multiple config files in here. You simply reference the one that you want. So you can call it anything, boolbar.xml if you wanted to, as long as you reference it with that name. So anyways, I have my Beam Scope application context.xml. Let's go ahead and beam it up. Let's go ahead and open this file. And what I want to do is just clean it up. There's some lines in here that I want to delete. So I'll select lines 10 and 11. I'll highlight those and I'll delete these lines because we're not going to use any of the property placeholder stuff here. I'll move down a little bit further and I'll also remove that beam for my Cricut coach. So I'll just highlight the lines 24 through 34 and I'll actually delete those lines. And I'll just clean this one, this white space here, move up, and let's do a little quick checkpoint. So in this new config file that we just created, Beam Scope application context.xml, these are the only two entries that we should have inside of here for beams. So we'll have our fortune service and we'll have our coach that points to our track coach. And that's all we should have at this point. Now, by default, since we didn't specify a scope for our track coach, well, what's a scope? Well, it's Singleton, right? Based on the information we've learned so far. So it'll simply be a single beam that everyone will reference when we run our application. So let's go ahead and create another main app. I'll call this guy Beam Scope Demo app.java. So I'll just do a right click. I'll say new class. And the actual name of the class, again, Beam Scope Demo app. And I'll also go down and I'll check the box there for the public static void main. So I'll have a main method, just a little separate demo app that I'll use for testing out this scoping stuff. Alrighty, okay with all that stuff, hit finish. All right, so we have a very simple Beam Scope demo app. So I'll just move in here, I'll just remove the auto-generated stuff, and I'll just write some quick comments here as far as what I need to do. So this is kind of, you're getting really used to this now. The first thing we need to do is load the Spring configuration file, and then simply retrieve beans from the Spring container. All right, that's kind of the game plan. Let's write the code right here. And you should probably know most of this now from memory because you've seen this a lot. So this is good practice, right? This is how you can really learn the technology just by repeating it over and over again, just like a sport. Practice, practice, practice. So let me go ahead and use that class path XML application context. And so I'll copy paste. I say new, and I give the actual name. So this is going to be the actual name of my new configuration file that we just created. So that's the file that we created called Beam Scope application context.xml. Let me go ahead and fix up the imports right here. I just hover over and say import that given class. That's good. And there we go. So yeah, so that's our new config file that we're reading in here. Beam Scope application context.xml. So again, you can have as many config files out there as you like for your project, simply load the appropriate one. And also if you have multiple, you simply give a common delimited list. You can load in multiple configs if you want to. All right, let's keep it simple for now. So now let's go ahead and get some white space and let's go ahead and retrieve the beam from the container. I'm actually going to retrieve two beams. So I'll start with the first one here. I'll say coach, the coach equals context.get beam. I get the name, which is my coach. And then I give the interface coach.class. That's good. And I'll simply just copy paste this line for the second reference. So I'll just do a paste on that one. Instead of the coach, I'll call it alpha coach. And everything else here stays the same. So basically this is the code here for retrieving the beam from the Spring container. So right now it's a singleton, right? So we should get the same reference. And we'll actually write some code in a second to show us the reference. But I'll kind of pause for now. In the next video, we'll write more code to print out the results of this reference. So I'll see you in the next video.
See, first what we need to do is we need to get the understanding what exactly is bean scope. Once again, we'll play the video. What exactly bean scope mean?
Move forward in the next videos, we're going to dive into. In this video, we're going to discuss the bean scopes available in Spring. So what exactly are scopes? Well, a scope refers to the life cycle of a bean.
So basically, what is telling? Scope is referring to the life cycle of a bean, life cycle of a Spring object, Java object. Now, how long does the object live? How many instances are created of how many instances are created? Let's see that later. Now, how is the bean shared? Life cycle of a bean. How long does a bean live? How is the bean shared?
For example, it tells you how long the bean will live, how many instances will be created, and also how is the bean shared in the Spring environment. So the default scope for a bean is Singleton. So here's an example here of just some bean code that we had earlier, and we didn't explicitly give a scope. So by default, the scope is Singleton. But now you're probably wondering, well, what exactly is a singleton? We know it's the default scope, but what is it? Well, for a singleton, the Spring container creates only one instance of the bean. It's
By default, Spring container. By default, the Spring container is going to create one instance of the bean. That means instance means an object. Instance in the sense object. By default, the Spring container is going to create only one object of the bean. That is by default. Only one instance of the bean. That means here bean in the sense cricket coach. Okay, in the configuration file, whatever we have specified by using bean. Okay, that is what a bean. And we have tennis coach, track coach, cricket coach, all these things, baseball coach, all those things. We have declared it in a separate bean. For that bean, the Spring container has to create a instance. By default, the Spring container is going to create one instance.
hashed in memory, and then all requests for that bean will return a shared reference to the same bean. So the end result is that there's only.
So all this will be available in the memory. Okay, simply cached in the sense it will be available in the memory. When I make a request to that bean, what happens? It is going to return a shared reference to the same bean. Okay, it is going to return a shared reference. This is important. Shared reference to the same bean. It is going to return a reference to the same bean when I request for a bean.
Only one bean, and everyone will share it.
That
the
means
end result is that there's only one bean, and everyone will share it.
what happens? If I make a request to the bean, what happens? It is going to return one bean. Okay, that bean reference will be shared by.
So the end result is that there's only one bean, and everyone will share it.
Here, everyone in the sense whoever requesting for that bean. Okay, first what happens? It is going to when I make a request, all the requests for the bean will return a shared reference to the same bean. Reference will be created. Those references will be shared. Whoever are asking for this bean. For the same bean, the Spring container, all the requests that we are making for a Spring container for a specific bean, what happens? It is going to return a shared reference. Whoever making a request for that bean it is going to return a shared reference. Okay, different references for the same bean.
Here's a nice diagram to kind of show you this example. In this example, we have the coach equals context.getBean, my coach, and it'll give you a reference to like a track coach that you have defined. And then later on in the code, if you would also do a similar thing saying context.getBean, my coach, the same bean ID, then it'll basically give you a reference to the same bean. We have these two object references here, and they point to the same area of memory, or they point to the same bean. So again, Spring makes use of a singleton. It'll create only one bean and then share it for everyone who requests that bean.
See here, track coach is considered is one bean, single bean. Okay, now two requests. Okay, for the same bean, two requests. Can you able to consider this as a shared reference? Shared reference for any number of requests. Shared reference. This is the only one bean in the Spring container for this two requests. For these two requests, shared reference.
So the Singleton Scope is default, and the best use case for this is for a stateless bean, where you don't need to maintain any state. You can explicitly specify the bean scope. I mean, by now you know that by default you have the Singleton Scope, but if you want to explicitly specify it, then you make use of the scope attribute. So you say scope equals singleton, and that'll make it a singleton bean. And that's kind of
the default is what? Singleton scope. Only one instance will be created for a specific bean. Only single instance will be created for a specific bean. For all the requests, the shared reference will be shared. The shared reference will be given. Spring container will be creating only one instance of a bean. Now for all the requests made by other users, let's assume, for those users what happens, it is going to shared what we are saying, shared reference to the same bean. Shared reference to the same bean. Spring container creates only one instance of the bean by default. That is what we are calling singleton. By default it is singleton. Spring container creates only one instance of the bean by default. It is available in the memory on the requests for that bean. What happens? It is going to return a shared reference to the same bean. Shared reference to the same track coach bean. For so many requests, shared reference for the same track coach bean.
this bean, where you don't need to maintain any state. You can explicitly specify the bean scope. I mean, by now you know that by default you have the Singleton Scope, but if you want to explicitly specify it, then you make use of the scope attribute. So you say scope equals singleton, and that'll make it a singleton bean. And that's kind of the preferred approach to minimize the number of beans that are created. But now there are additional Spring bean scopes that you can make use of. We've already covered singleton. There's also the prototype scope, which creates a new bean instance for each container request, and we'll see examples of that coming up. And we'll also use that as a demo in the video coming up. Then the next.
See, by default bean scope is singleton. Apart from that, we have these things: prototype, request session, global session. For the prototype, creates a new bean instance for each container request. We'll see all these things later. As of now, by default, it is singleton.
Next three items here: request, session, and global session. These scopes are only used in a web environment. So request is for a given web request. Session is for a HTTP web session, for like session tracking, for like maybe a shopping cart or something. And then global session is scope application wide. But we'll talk more about these later when we get into the Spring MVC section. But for now, we'll simply focus on Singleton and Prototype. So here's an example of using Prototype Scope. So again, remember, Prototype Scope, a new object is created for each request. So in this example here, I have my bean ID of my coach, and I have scope equals prototype. So that means that every time I make a request for this my coach, they'll create a new instance each time. So a nice little diagram here. So the line of code at the top, the coach equals type.
So in case of prototype scope, what happens? It is going to create a new bean instance. Okay, it is going to create a new instance for the same bean. Okay, this is the request. Consider this is one request, this is another request. It is not going to use only single bean. It is going to create the instance of the same bean, two instances of the same track coach bean. This is the prototype scope.
Context get bean my coach. It'll create a new instance of that bean. I'll get a reference to it. And then a similar thing here, when I say alpha coach equals context I get bean my coach, it'll create a new object for you and you'll have your own reference. So the prototype scope is good for keeping track of stateful data. So again, whenever you see prototype, just think of the new keyword. It's going to create a new bean for each request for that component or that object. All right, so this is some really good stuff. Let's go ahead and move forward in the next videos. We're going to dive into Eclipse, and then we'll actually write some code that'll make use of the Singleton Scope and the prototype scope so you can see everything in action. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into Eclipse. We're going to run some demos here on bean scopes. We'll take a look at the Singleton Scope and the prototype scope, and we'll see all of this code running in action. And I don't know, just get a good feel for it. So the first thing we want to do is copy our application context file. We're actually going to create a new version of it. So we'll take this existing application context. We'll just do a right click and choose copy. And then we'll simply paste it. So we just do a right click and we choose paste. In this new version, we'll give it a new name here. So I'll call it bean scope application context.xml. And so with these Spring config files, you can really give them any name that you want. And your project can actually have multiple config files in here. You simply reference the one that you want. So you can call it anything, foobar.xml if you wanted to, as long as you reference it with that name. So anyways, I have my bean scope application context.xml. Let's go ahead and beam it up. Let's go ahead and open this file. And what I want to do is just clean it up. There's some lines in here that I want to delete. So I'll select lines 10 and 11. I'll highlight those and I'll delete these lines because we're not going to use any of the property placeholder stuff here. I'll move down a little bit further and I'll also remove that bean for my cricket coach. So I'll just highlight the lines 24 through 34 and I'll actually delete those lines. And I'll just clean this one, this white space here, move up, and let's do a little quick checkpoint. So in this new config file that we just created, bean scope application context.xml, these are the only two entries that we should have inside of here for beans. So we'll have our fortune service and we'll have our coach that points to our track coach. And that's all we should have at this point. Now, by default, since we didn't specify a scope for our track coach, well, what's the scope? Well, it's Singleton, right? Based on the information we've learned so far. So it will simply be a single bean that everyone will reference when we run our application. So let's go ahead and create another main app. I'll call this guy bean scope demo app.java. So I'll just do a right click. I'll say new class. And the actual name of the class, again, bean scope demo app. And I'll also go down and I'll check the box there for the public static void main. So I'll have a main method, just a little separate demo app that I'll use for testing out this scoping stuff. All righty, okay with all that stuff, hit finish. All right, so we have a very simple bean scope demo app. So I'll just move in here, I'll just remove the auto-generated stuff, and I'll just write some quick comments here as far as what I need to do. So this is kind of, you're getting really used to this now. The first thing we need to do is load the Spring configuration file, and then simply retrieve beans from the Spring container. All right, that's kind of the game plan. Let's write the code right here. And you should probably know most of this now from memory because you've seen this a lot. So this is good practice, right? This is how you can really learn the technology just by repeating it over and over again, just like a sport. Practice, practice, practice. So let me go ahead and use that class path XML application context. And so copy paste and say new, and I give the actual name. So this is going to be the actual name of my new configuration file that we just created. So that's the file that we created called Bean Scope application context.xml. Let me go ahead and fix up the imports right here. I just hover over and say import that given class. That's good. And there we go. So yeah, so that's our new config file that we're reading in here. Bean Scope application context.xml. So again, you can have as many config files out there as you like for your project. Simply load the appropriate one. And also, if you had multiple, you simply give a comma delimited list. You can load in multiple configs if you want to. All right, let's keep it simple for now. So now let's go ahead and get some white space, and let's go ahead and retrieve the bean from the container. I'm actually going to retrieve two beans. So I'll start with the first one here. I'll say coach, the coach equals context.get bean. I give the name, which is my coach. And then I give the interface coach.class. That's good. And I'll simply just copy paste this line for the second reference. So I'll just do a paste on that one. Instead of the coach, I'll call it alpha coach. And everything else here stays the same. So basically, this is the code here for retrieving the bean from the Spring container. So right now it's a singleton, right? So we should get the same reference. And we'll actually write some code in a second to show us the reference. But I'll kind of pause for now. In the next video, we'll write more code to print out the results of this reference. So I'll see you in the next video.
Yeah. First, we are going to copy this configuration.xml. Then simply what you can do is here itself, right click and paste here. Okay. Paste. Here I'll name it as Bean Scope application. Bean Scope any name, it doesn't matter. Bean Scope configuration. Bean Scope configuration. XML. Fine. So here what we'll do, Bean Scope, right? Here I'll remove whichever we don't want. Okay, I'll remove this I function should be there. Then let's go for track coach. Okay, that much. Everything will be removed. So I'll be closing this bean. Save it. By default, it is the singleton. We don't have to give explicitly that singleton. Okay, scope is we don't have to give it explicitly. By default, it is singleton. Next, what we need to do? I'm going to create a new class. new class. In demo app. Need the public static void main. Removing auto-generated comment now. First, we need to load the configuration file, Spring configuration file. So class path XML application context. Going to import it. Context is equal to copy this. Paste it here. So new. Then while loading, we need to load what? This one. Bean scope. Right? Bean scope configuration.xml. Bean scope configuration. Everything should be same. Okay. Configuration.xml. Cross check. Bean scope hyphen configuration.xml. Configuration.xml. Okay. Next. Retrieve the bean from the Spring container, right? Retrieving the bean from the Spring container. Coach is equal to context.get bean. Context.get bean. Here I'll say what is the name here in the bean scope. What we have given bean coach ID, right? This one. So bean coach ID, bean ID coach, comma coach data class. Coach data class. Fine. Same thing I'll copy paste. In this case, is simply you can go for my coach. Same thing, same. This much as of now. Fine. Let's come to the next.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. So the previous video, we simply retrieved those beans from the container for the coach and alpha coach. Now let's go ahead and just do some more work here. So the first thing I want to do is check to see if these are the same beans. So I'll simply set up a Boolean variable result, and I will actually compare these two. I'll compare their object references. So I'll say the coach equals alpha coach, and I'll put that in parentheses just to show you that I'm comparing these two items. I'm comparing their object reference to see if they are pointing to the same area of memory or if they're pointing to the same object. That's what we're doing here with this Boolean result equals. Now let's go ahead and display the results here so we can see exactly what's going on. So let me set up my quick comment here to print out the results, and I'll use my sysout print line. And then inside of here, I'll actually say pointing to the same object, and then plus result. And I put a \n at the beginning of that string just to give me a character term. just so I can have some extra white space when I'm looking at the results here of my run. All right, so that's the first one here. And then I also want to actually print out the memory location for each one of these. So I'll say, the memory location for the coach. And I just go plus the coach. And so by default, the default version of this display here, we'll call the toString method of this object. And the default implementation of the toString is that will simply give the class name and the internal memory address for that given object reference. So I'll do a simple thing here for alpha coach. All right, that looks okay. And I'll add an extra character term just to make the output look pretty. And also I'll be nice in the string container and I'll close the context. All right, so that's kind of it. So, we already read in the config file up top, then we retrieve the bean from the container. We move down and we just check the results, see if they're the same. And then we print out the results and we also print out the memory location for the coach and alpha coach. Oh, actually, let me fix a quick typo here. So pointing, I put a colon space right there on line 22, just to make my output look a little bit prettier. All right, so run as Java application. And good stuff here. All right, let's check out this output. Okay, great. So first off, it says, loading XML bean definitions from this file, bean scope application context. So that's our new file that we just created. And so we are reading that file, which is good. And then here's the printout of the results pointing to the same object is true. And also we have the memory location for the coach, which is 5E85, and also the memory location for alpha coach 5E85. So basically those numbers are the same. So it's actually printing to the same area of memory for both of these objects. So that's great. Now let's go ahead and switch this up. Let's test this with scope equals prototype. So scope equals prototype means that it'll actually create a new object every time we request it. So here I'll say scope equals prototype in the config file. All right, so this looks good. So scope equals prototype is going to create a new object for each request. Let's go ahead and save this file. And now all we need to do is go back to the Bean Scope demo app and then just run it. No changes here. Everything here stays the same. Just right click and choose Run As. All right, so looking at the output. Okay, now, reading from that config, Bean Scope app context. Now it says pointing to the same object is false. Ooh, yeah, because it's prototype, right? So that means that they create a new object for each reference, right? So the coach has one memory address, and then alpha coach has a different memory address. So these are two separate objects, two separate areas of memory, because again, right, we're using the prototype scope. All right, so nice little example here of making use of Singleton Scope and prototype scope. And here you're able to see the output, see the results, and so on. So you should feel very comfortable now with Bean scopes. So again, the default is Singleton, it's only one instance. And then you can also specify prototype scope, which will create a new one for each request. All right, you're ready. You're ready for a sprint.
See here, let us go for to check whether it is really a singleton bean or prototype. Really, is it a singleton scope or prototype? Now let us set up Boolean flag is equal to coach. Whether these two references are pointing to the same object or not. See, by default, in container, it is going to create a single instance of the bean. That instance will be shared by multiple references. Now, I'll print this. Okay. This. Both are pointing the same instance. Okay, that means same object. Other pointing to the same instance, question mark. Now I'm going to print a flag. Okay. And next, what we should do is memory address will print. Okay, we'll get the clarity. Memory address. If I print the memory address, we'll get the clarity. Memory address. Memory address of coach. I'll say coach. Then, so the memory address of my coach. Memory address of my coach. My coach. Now, let's run this. Run as Java application. No such bean instance. Instantiation exception. What is that? Caused by bean instantiation exception. No such method. Track coach. Okay. Bean ID coach in the track coach. What do we have? Bean ID coach, right? So Bean ID coach. Same only I have given. Bean ID coach. Class, okay. Bean ID coach. Maybe something is wrong in here. Dependency, happy fortune service. Fine. What happens here? Bean ID coach is there. Then do I need to include the constructor injection? Okay. There is no such method, right? So include that constructor here. Reference is equal to reference is equal to reference. Constructor arg reference. Let me go for this. Reference my function. Okay. Here, this one. Something here. Now let's try. Let's try P demo app run as Java application. Now both are pointing to the same object. Yes, true. So that is why we are getting same reference, means same memory address. But in case if I do what, scope equal to what, scope is equal to prototype. So now what happens? By default scope is singleton, but if I say scope is equal to prototype, now observe the change. Whether these two are pointing to the same object, false. A separate instance will be returned by the Spring container, not the same instance. Instead, a separate instance. Okay, two instances of the track coach, not the same object, different object of the bean, not the same object. In case of singleton, for two references, it is going to return shared address of the same bean, shared address of the same instance. Okay, shared address of the same bean. That is why we were getting true, same memory location. But here, in case of prototype, each time when a request comes, a new instance will be created. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Devraj has left already. Fine. Fine, Venkatesh will continue tomorrow. Okay.
Okay, sir.